Hey, everybody. Thanks for returning to the podcast. This week, I have a very special guest, Patti. She was one of the participants in my very first grief recovery method program, group program, and she's going to be sharing her grieving voice with you today. Um, Patti, want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I've never done this before, so.
No, this will be great. It's just a conversation. So let's start with what brought you to grief recovery. We'll start there.
So I've had a lot of grief in my life, and I try not to let it. It made me of who I am today, but I try not to let it lead my life. But I realized that I needed to work on some things, and I heard about this and messaged you about it and asked some questions, and I thought I might as well just give this a try. Um, but it turned out to be something completely opposite of what I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to be doing something about my husband, and it turned out not to be that. It turned out to be someone living in my life.
And how had you tried other things before to help process your grief?
I was kind of in the mood of I didn't want to talk to a stranger like a counselor about someone about my husband who they didn't even know. And so to me, I just kind of pushed that all away, I guess. So no, I hadn't tried anything else.
Okay. So what would you say has been or was the hardest thing or has been the hardest thing about the loss of your husband? Because this was actually your first husband,
Yep.
and you've since remarried and have
Hmm.
a beautiful boy and another on the way, and you're happy now with a
Hmm.
great relationship. Share with our listeners how that transition from that loss and what you experienced during that time and what could have been more helpful to you or what was helpful to you. Just kind of share a little bit more about that loss and the transition from um, that loss into where you are now in your relationship with your new husband.
So it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to go through. We hadn't been married that long, a year and a half, I think it was. And just it was so tragic and fast. Like it was very unexpected. So he was only 32 years old, and it was a four-wheeler accident at work, so it was very unexpected. Um, but I clung on to people that wanted to be around me, and I kind of learned who my true friends were. Um, some people I lost friendships over this, and it's weird that you would think like I didn't cause him, his death or anything, but I did lose friendships. Family dynamics changed as far as his family and me. And then just me as a person, I changed it. I think people say like it kills a little bit of you, and I wouldn't say it killed a little bit of me, but it definitely like changed how I thought about life and um, the way I lived life. I wanted to kind of get away from everything. So I applied for some different jobs and ended up moving to Ashley, North Dakota. I had only planned on staying there for about a year, and then I wanted to move south. I wanted to move to Tennessee, where one of my best friends lives, um, or just somewhere near there. Like I didn't have my family anymore. I didn't have my husband, so I wanted to have the career. I ended up meeting my now husband, and we had gotten pregnant then. So I have a little boy. He's now 4. And now we've had to deal together with secondary infertility, which to me is kind of like another loss. We suffered a miscarriage a year after our first was born. And then just going through the infertility was tough, and we learned a lot from each other, and it wasn't perfect. We weren't perfect in our stuff, I guess, in our lives, like with how to deal with that infertility, secondary infertility. And then we ended up deciding to do IVF, and now we are pregnant, about halfway pregnant with our little girl. So Life now, I still, 6 years later, I still grieve my first husband, and I always will. I will always grieve him. It's just the way I grieve is a little different now, and I, the way I like to, what helps me is I like to help other people who've experienced a loss of someone, and maybe it's just me going out to lunch with them or having a conversation. And not everyone wants that, but I reach out, and if they want my friendship, then that's fine. Um, I hate that we have that connection, but it is what it is, and life is what it is, and that's the way I guess I have grown as a person, is helping others with loss. So, but now, yeah, I mean, I still grieve him 6 years later, and I'll grieve him for every day for the rest of my life, but it's just a little different now, and I am happy. Um, but I still grieve him, so
Well, and because grief doesn't end because
no.
we still, I mean, you loved him, obviously, and that doesn't just go away, right?
Mhm.
We grieve because we love.
Mhm.
And um, in going through the grief recovery method, you know that grief is the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations. And despite all the joy that you have in your life right now, it, you know, can you speak to, is it what might have been, what could have been, um, or what was? Like, you know, these unexpected losses that you said occurred because of that
Mhm.
loss, you know, the things that you experienced because of that loss. Can you
Mhm.
speak to that a little bit?
Um, yeah,
Like friendships that you lost
yeah,
and things like that?
I just think I just think like the loss of expectations. So you think that you're not going to lose those friendships. You think that you expect things to go differently. Like I did not expect to get married again. I did not expect to fall in love, but I was young, and that's just what happened. And I am so thankful, and I thank God every day for who I did fall in love with, because he is so understanding of my whole journey with Jared and everything, like my first husband. So I'm very thankful for my husband now, that he is truly understanding of that. And maybe he doesn't understand it, or but he's there and he supports me through it all. So I'm very thankful for that.
And that is huge, right? Is
Mhm.
he, I know in grief recovery you learn too about being a heart with ears. So is
Mhm.
he, sounds like he is that for you.
He is my heart with ears, yes.
Yeah, that's special. Um, so what would you like to say to the world about, or wish that people knew about your grief?
I like to tell people all the time, grieve how you want, as long as you're not hurting yourself or others. How long you want. I just feel like there should be no timeline on it. You can grieve as long as you want, grieve as short as you want. I just don't think there's any right or wrong answer. But I just don't think that, as a widow or someone who's lost someone, like, don't let people tell you how to grieve and how long to grieve. And I just remember feeling like I can't sit at home and cry. I can't be out in public and smiling and anyone be happy with that. So I was just going to do things for me, and I didn't care what people thought. If I wanted to be happy that day, I was going to be happy. If I wanted to cry, I was going to cry. And I still have those days where I just want to cry or I just want to be happy. So I call them my Jared days.
Well, and like grief, you know this, it just, like going through the grief recovery method, having experienced it, it comes in waves, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
gonna come and it's gonna go.
Mm-hmm.
But the important thing I think our listeners hear is that you have not allowed these expectations placed on you by societal norms of, you know, we learn in grief recovery that one of the myths of grief is time heals all wounds,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, and I know that
Mm-hmm.
time just passes. It's what you
Mm-hmm.
do and the action that you take within that time. Now, I know the relationship with your husband is not one that you have worked on through
Mm-hmm.
grief recovery yet. Um, but, you know, once you go through this method, and as you know, you have these tools to use whenever at your
Mm-hmm.
disposal. And what resonates with me, and I know, or what resonated with me early on in my healing journey, and we kind of talked about it briefly before we started recording, is that healing takes time, right? And an investment in ourself takes time.
Mhm.
And we can get really busy in life, children, work, careers, jobs, husbands, all these distractions pulling at us and, you know, screaming at us for their time. I've
Mhm.
got 3 kids and a husband and day job and a side hustle, and so it's like all these things. But there's one thing that I've learned is that even if I take 1 hour a week, even just 1 hour a week, to just read something that will inspire me, that will motivate me to reach my highest potential, or um, dig a little deeper into what I've been feeling.
Mhm.
Sometimes that's all it takes too, to create momentum and things. And so, are there any practices that you've been doing since grief recovery to help you keep that at the top of your mind? Maybe it's not necessarily a priority right now because you've had a lot of um, things that you've been, have really been more of your focus, with a new baby.
Mhm.
You're growing a baby, like that's a
Mhm.
lot of work.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and and it's taxing on the body too, right? It's
Mhm.
like it's
Mhm.
exhausting to grow a baby. All you women can resonate, mothers.
Mhm.
And you already have a child, a boy, and so
Mhm.
I know there's all these things in your life that take your time now, but is there anything that you could, even if it's just a micro thing, like something small, what is helping you on days where you're having those Jared days, or when you're feeling a little overwhelmed by life, or you're feeling just emotionally taxed a little bit? Is there anything that you're doing that is helping you on those days?
I know that maybe I'm doing it a different way than like reading something. But I think my way of doing it would be talking, like having conversations, like deep conversations with people. And I've had quite a few lately, and I'm not really sure why, but my friends, they didn't know Jared, but they still ask me questions about it. Like, how did you feel? Like, what did you do? And they just listen to me, but they still like want to know too, and I think for me, like, you guys really should get, your life insurance figured out, or like a will or something, because you just never know. Like, we're getting older and things happen, and it's just life and it sucks. And you don't want to think about that stuff. But we didn't either when my husband passed away. So I think having those deep conversations, we have feeling conversations. Like, I've just been having a lot of that lately. Um, and then just like I drive a half hour on my way home, so I feel like I decompress and I'm like, okay, my work day is over and now I need to focus on other things. So that half hour to work and on the way back, I feel like I get to reflect a lot, and I get to reflect a lot by having these conversations with people. So that's kind of my way, maybe not so much journaling or reading something, but just the deep conversations with people.
I just got body chills because yes, that totally resonates with me, because I think especially in grief, we get like, it's so easy for society, just even in general, to have like these surface level conversations, like,
Mm-hmm.
talk about the weather.
Yeah.
Let's talk about grief like we talk about the weather. And maybe I got to change that, because that really brings to light, like, well, I want it. When I say that, let's talk about grief like we talk about the weather, it's more like, let's just make it daily conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Let's make it part of the conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we actually just talk about the weather, we're just really scratching the surface, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
what lights you up? If someone were to ask you that, like, what lights you up? I know I've asked some people that in my circle, and they kind of look at me like I have two heads. It's like you kind of can see who you can have deep conversation with.
Oh
You
yeah.
figure it, yeah. And oftentimes I find it's people who have an awareness around what they've endured in their life and how it's
Mhm.
impacted their life,
Mhm.
both the
And it might
positive
not
and the
even be like
negative.
serious. It might not even be like serious as losing someone, but just like, even though I've lost a husband, I feel like I can relate to other people that were in my group that never actually like lost someone. It's
Right,
like our
massive
grief is
change.
similar. Yeah. Yeah.
Just
Our grief
massive
is
change.
similar, but we can still talk about it like it's the same, but it's not. I don't know.
Well, and it wouldn't be, right? Because
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
relationship is unique and individual. And that's the
Yeah.
beautiful thing about deep conversation,
Mhm.
right? Is we can
Mhm.
see things from a different perspective that is impossible for us to see it because we
Mhm.
haven't experienced it.
Mhm.
And so I really resonate when you say that. Like deep conversation really jazzes me too. Like it lights me up. Yeah, I
I'd
love
rather
it.
talk about it than journal it, I guess. My hand gets tired.
But that's an excellent tip. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really a really valid, useful point to make. And also too, like, 30 minutes in a commute. Like I travel a lot with my day job. I love podcasts.
Mhm.
I love listening to podcasts during that time, stuff that's going to feed my brain, stuff that's going to motivate me or inspire me or,
Mhm.
want encourage me to strive for just to be better in who I am and live my life more aligned with what I value. And I
Mhm.
think, would you agree that kind of grief does that for us? Like it kind of just really, it's kind of like it's a reset button for
Mhm.
our soul, maybe. It's a reset button for our lives in a lot of ways. Like
Mhm.
in another interview, we talked about how it's like this clarifier.
Mhm.
It clarifies things. So, in what ways do you feel like your grief has clarified things for you in your life?
So sometimes I feel like people not that they take it for granted, but they just don't realize like, well, and sometimes I catch myself too if I'm complaining like, "Oh, my son's being so naughty today, like someone come take him." But then I think of the person who lost their 4-year-old son and I'm like, they wish they would have that. And so I think of that too like I try not to complain. Like when I'm complaining, I just like have to decompress and be like, okay, I don't have it bad. Like I can
Mm,
handle this. People like I wish I could fight with Jared. Like I have fights with Barrett. Like so I just try not to take some of that stuff for granted. And I like try and think like, okay, life really isn't that bad. I've been through bad and other people have been through are going through worse things and I should just be grateful and thankful for what I have in my life right now. Like I am very thankful that we got to go through IVF and we did get pregnant because it doesn't always work for everyone. And I'm thankful for the way that that journey's been and led us. And I've helped a lot of people because of that. Other women who are going through it, other men who are going through it. So I just have to try and feel thankful for my time right now.
I just had an inspired thought. Perhaps you and Barrett want to start a podcast about
Oh.
infertility.
I actually listen to infertility podcasts and I love hearing other women, but I don't know. I would rather them reach out to me. It's still like an unspoken thing. Like a lot of people don't want to talk about it. Other people love to talk about it. So it's just like if I let the women come to me or the men come to me. So,
That's wonderful. Um, that you're willing to share in that way because and also having you bring a unique perspective to that too, I think, just because you've gone through grief recovery and you have this, it's not even inside knowledge, it's just new knowledge, right? It's
well,
new
it's not talked
knowledge.
about. Like people don't talk about it. So other, like women don't know, like if they just have a simple thing wrong with their hormones or something, it might just be a pill they have to take, and that's not huge, but other people need more in their lives as far as the infertility side of it. So to me, it's like if I can just get them to go to the doctor and see what's wrong, it could be something so simple, and then they could have that baby and things like that. I just want to be
Sure.
inspiring for people.
Well, you're starting here. You're started on Instagram. Actually, I just want to, before I forget and before we get into some other conversation, but where can people find you where you're sharing your story with infertility, that where they can reach out to you? Where can they
I
find
did
you?
start with Instagram because there are some people in my life that don't feel comfortable talking about IVF and infertility, and they just don't feel comfortable. So I started with the Instagram. Haven't been updating it in a while, but my Facebook, my personal Facebook too, like if you want to message me on there or add me as a friend, I mean, I can tell if you're fake or not. So,
But where can people find you on Instagram then? What's your
Journey to Baby Hair 2
journey to baby hair too? And I'll put it
with the
that
number twos.
number two.
Yeah.
Okay. I will put that in the show notes.
Okay.
Um, okay, so let's move on to what would be one tip that you would give um, other hurting hearts today?
Um, if you, some people I feel like that I've known now since I've been become a widow, they maybe don't need as much help, I guess, outside help. But I thought the GRM course was very good for me, and I'm glad that I found it. But that was 5 years later, you know. But I feel like if you have a good support system, like find your support system. It doesn't have to be family. It doesn't have to. I don't know. I just if you want to find other widows, or maybe not, maybe they don't even have to be other widows or widowers, but just find someone to be able to talk to. Find people who are supportive of everything you're doing. Um, and then just don't let anyone tell you how to grieve or how long to grieve, because you're going to do it at your own pace. And maybe you don't want to grieve that long. Maybe you don't want to feel the way you do. So then you just need some extra support. So have a good support system. And I feel like the ladies that I actually took the class with, they are going to have a special place in my heart for the rest of my life. So whether we don't talk every day or we do, you know, I haven't talked to some of them in a long time, but I feel like I could just pick up the phone and call them and they would answer. So I am thankful for that.
That was a very, for those that don't know or aren't aware, but yeah, it was my very first group, and it was just a really, really good experience for me. I, yeah, it meant everything to me. And it really set the stage for the work that I'm doing and still continue to do, and launching the podcast, and just, you know, it's like, so thank you for sharing that, because you help spread the message too, that grief recovery is a valid option for people to move beyond loss and grief.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm, would you mind speaking a little bit to how, though, grief with the living? Because so often people think of grief and they think of a loss, like you've expressed, and shared about your first husband. But um, would you mind sharing your perspective on grief with the living and how that's impacted your life?
Yeah. So doing the class again, I thought it was going to be my husband. That's the obvious grief in my life. But it turned out to be someone who was supposed to be a huge person in my life, and they weren't at like 2 weeks old. So I still, again, am dealing with that, as many other people in the class that were dealing with the living people still deal with as well. And as we talked before, I've learned to, um, I went through the class and I forgave her for me, but I also have not technically mended the relationship, but I feel as if I'm in a better place with it. Um, whether that person is with me or not, but and maybe we aren't where we should be, but I just feel better about it after taking the class, and or maybe know how, like, why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling with that relationship. But it is a lot different, um, because that person is still living and they're probably still in your life if you're
Yeah.
grieving that, and they're still probably an important person in your life. So
Yeah, and I can resonate with that totally, completely. It is difficult when they're still in your life because we can't choose our family, right? But
mm-hmm.
um, what um, what was I gonna say? Um, there was something that you had shared about. I'm really gonna have to edit this part.
was about like the toxic relationship, or not, like
This
only
is why I gotta.
allowing
This is why I
her
gotta
insight.
write notes.
You should just record from the beginning and then edit all that out.
No, it was a really good point about God dang it. What the heck was it? It was about the relationship with the living. I will edit this, don't worry.
Yeah, I got it.
Um oh, this is gonna make me crazy. You were talking about your mom and how she wasn't in your life and we can't, yeah. Oh, total brain dead. Oh my gosh. This is why I write notes as I'm listening and I didn't.
But I was talking so much at the beginning.
It was what you just were saying, and I had a thought, and I thought, God, I want to. That's a really good thing to bring up to the listeners about relationship with the living, and that just kind of refresh what you like the points, key points you said.
Like in the, like before the podcast,
Nope, nope, just what you
just
were
now.
just saying. Yeah, about your with the relationship with your mom.
I have mended things on my end. Like I have forgiven, I guess, or but maybe our relationship isn't what it should be.
Oh, boundaries,
Oh, there you go.
boundaries.
That was from before. Okay.
Well, okay, so that's what like when you were talking about like it's different now and I'm like, okay, yes, that's what I want to drive home is that okay. So share with me about what was the even though you didn't work on the relationship with your mother when we were going through the grief recovery method as the group. Ooh, I said mother. Do you not want
Yeah,
that?
maybe I maybe don't.
Okay. Okay.
I think she knows, but I don't want her to know.
Okay, yep. Okay. Scratch that. So, share with the listeners, if you wouldn't mind, the relationship with someone living, for example. It wasn't someone that you didn't work on a relationship with someone living in the grief recovery group program when we went through with the other individuals, but what do you feel like when you after you've gone through that method and you were looking at the relationship with the people living in your life, what do you feel like was one thing that came out of that? Like what was an awareness or something, like how did going through GRM connect the dots for you in other relationships, I guess, having not yet worked on those relationships?
So I've just learned like I can forgive people and I can mend that relationship with myself and them, but not necessarily them in person. But I only allow them to hurt me so much now. So like I put my family first, my child first, so I don't let some of those living people um around us. Not that I don't let them around, but I just only let them in so much, and I know how to now handle if our relationships, like I understand now why my relationship with that living person is the way it is and how I can deal with it. There's something called PS letters, and I know that for the rest of my life I will have PSSSSSSS letters with that living person. So
And so, what it kind of sounds like to me is that you've really established where you needed boundaries for
mm-hmm.
yourself and your family around that relationship, around those people living in
Yep.
your life. Would you agree?
Yes,
Yeah.
I
I've,
took responsibility for our relationship, I
yeah.
guess. Well, on my end,
Because
how
that's all we can
she,
do, right?
yeah, she needs, that person needs to do the rest.
Right. Yep. We can only work on ourselves. That's all we have control over. Um, and one way that we can protect our energy and protect
Mm-hmm.
our hearts is to create those boundaries of um, it's just a buffer, right? We create
Mm-hmm.
like this protective shield around ourselves, and it's not to um, keep them out, right?
Right.
But it's
I'm not
to
pushing them away. Yeah.
Right. It's to protect what's inside, what's
Yeah.
within that boundary, including our loved ones, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Because doing that is actually a form of self-care. I've learned that when we create boundaries for ourselves and for, what matters to us, that is self-care in
Mhm.
action.
I've had to do that with quite a few relationships now, and I believe GRM helped with that. So,
Excellent. Yeah, because it's an educational program. You learn
mhm.
so much.
You
Um,
focus more on the tools, and like I thought it was going to be more on like I had to sit there and talk about my relationship. No, it was more based on you gave us tools how to handle situations or things, our relationships. So,
Yep, and every day, every week actually is like a little puzzle piece, right? Kind of comes together. Did you see it coming like in the first 2 weeks? Like were you like, what did I get myself into?
yeah.
Like what?
I know there was a few of us that were a little like we pushed back a little bit in the first weeks because we were like we want to see results now, but I think in the end we were all very happy with how it went. So,
It takes time. And because there's so much content, there's so much
mhm.
information, like your brains couldn't even really like, my brain had to take it all in like a matter of days, but and a griever's mind and a griever's heart can't just it's that's not for everybody. It's
Mhm.
really not. And so that's why it's broken down into little chunks of information to that builds every week, kind of like algebra. It's like algebra.
Yeah.
It builds up every week after, every lesson
Yep.
after lesson. But
And I just feel like anger is just like for me was has always been a part of grief, and I think I was like pushing back because I was angry. I didn't know why I was feeling that way, and that class made me feel certain things that I didn't know I was going to feel, and so I was just pushing back a little bit, but then it all buffed out in the end. So,
yeah, it really helped you to process
mhm.
the anger and stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, gave me the tools to do that.
yeah. Is there anything else that you would like? I mean, this is you this is your opportunity, your grieving voice to share. Is there anything else you would like to share with our listeners today?
Just that grief can come in many forms. Like in my situation, I thought that this whole time, it was going to be about Jared, and it was about someone living, but it is about Jared too. It's about it all. And I just learned that it's crazy how we can grieve living people. We can grieve people who are gone. You know, it's just, I think everyone is going to grieve someone or something in their lives, whether they actually lost them or not. So,
So I just had a thought come to my mind, which I think is very important that we bring up because um, you got to IVF because you had a miscarriage.
mm-hmm.
And miscarriage, as you know, through grief recovery, is one of the most minimized losses. Um, do you feel like, and it's this is me and my curiosity, and we're just, this is on the cuff, off the cuff, but do you feel like the education that you received through grief recovery had set you up to help you process that loss in particular, that
Yes. I,
and for your husband as well?
yeah, we grieved it differently. And I think some people don't think that the men grieve it this, and we don't grieve it the same, but I feel like men, they just don't think that they grieve it like women do. But my husband grieved the loss of that baby, and we both did, and we still do. We still look at around town and think our child should be that age and running around with that kid. And it is hard. And, but we've grown as a couple and individuals. And I think even though he didn't take the class, what I have talked about, like he is also taken into heart and understands a little bit. So, yes.
Yeah, and because grief is cumulative and it's cumulatively negative, I think I say this on every episode,
Mm-hmm.
but it's so important, right? Because if you think about like all the losses that you've had, and you know that doing this work, like you look at every loss. It's put in front of you. You look at it, literally look at it all. Um, it could be easy to just lay back on, just lay down in life and just give
Mm-hmm.
up and just like I can't take another thing. I cannot take another thing. Like it's just, because it stacks up one after the other. Um, Someone who has gone through a miscarriage, what do you feel like they can do? I know you mentioned about finding your support, which is
Hmm.
amazing, but what is it about miscarriage in particular? Because I don't have personal experience with that. I, I, I don't. But what is something that if I came to you and I said that I had this miscarriage, what do you feel like is the best piece of advice that you could give me?
I would just be there for you right away, like, how are you doing with it? And then if you want to talk about it, then I would be that, listening heart with ears. Um, but I catch myself saying, oh my gosh, they were that far along, or, at least it wasn't after the first trimester. Like, I catch myself saying that, and I'm like, but I miscarried in the first trimester. And I do feel like it was just as hard as losing a full term baby. Like, I still went through the labor. I still miscarried that baby. Like, it was still a person. It was, even though I only miscarried and I was like 12, I was 12 weeks, but the baby died earlier. Um, I don't know. I think you got to talk about it if you want, and reach out to people who have miscarried, because most likely almost every woman has had a miscarriage. Like, most women have, and you would never know. My grandma had like 5 of them. So I just talked to her the other day about miscarriages, like, but back in her day too, like, they just didn't talk about it. And you don't have to, but if you need to, there is support out there. And my question, like, now that I've gone through IVF, is why are you miscarrying? If you want to do, like, if you want to have another baby, I will be there for you, and I will answer any questions that you need, like how to get started about going to the doctor. It could just be something so simple, which is sad that you had to go through a miscarriage because of that. And I would never wish a miscarriage upon anyone, because it's awful. Um, but just, I don't know, don't just blow it off like it's just something little, because it's not. Even if you miscarried at 6 weeks, like, it's still a miscarriage.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, I agree. A baby is a baby, a life is
Yes.
a life. Um, do you feel like, and I don't know, like, can you speak to this a little bit too? Like, that part of the problem is maybe the fact, maybe why it is one of the most minimized losses is because it is not talked about, because it is such a, like a, maybe it is because do people have this feeling, you think, that is so common? Like, it's just
Well,
so
it's
common,
one in
like,
four. One in four is like, that's what they're saying, one in four. And for me, I tried minimizing it by saying, it's one in four. Obviously, there was something wrong with it. It couldn't grow anymore. So, it kind of is a blessing, but it's still a loss. Like, whether it's a blessing or not, like, whether a 94-year-old person dies and it was a blessing, it's still a loss.
yeah.
Like, a loss is a loss. And if you want to feel sad about that loss, whether they're 94 years old or 6 weeks in the womb, like, I just think you got to feel it.
I think that is a great place to end. A loss is a loss, and you just got to feel it. I love that. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Patti, for sharing your story of loss, of, being a widow, miscarriage, IVF, um, just the losses we can experience with those living in our lives, for sharing your experience through grief recovery, um, for sharing that with whomever you cross paths with in your daily life. It means the world to me, um, to spread this message that there is hope, that there is something there that can help you have a new perspective on grief. I think that's really kind of what it comes down to, is that it doesn't have to define the rest of your life. It doesn't have to um, be the driver of your life,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think you are doing wonderful things by sharing. your story with people, being a heart with ears for others. Um, we need more of that definitely in our society. So thank you for being that for people, um, and for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Again, I will have in the show notes where you can find Patti if you want to reach out to her on the topics of IVF, being a widow, or miscarriage. Um, and until next time, much love. Take care.